Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the South African Chamber based in the UK for our series, Thought Leaders series. And our guest, Clem Sunter, known to many of us, which is why we have such a fantastic attendance today. I'm Sharon Constanson. I am chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, and I welcome the many, many members I see in the webinar with us today, and those future members of the Chamber as well. We have attendance, I believe, from most continents around the globe, so a very big draw card, Clem. You are responsible for that, not me. For 2 years, we as a chamber had to go online, and we had to spend our time in this virtual environment as we're doing today. But one of the things we have learned from that experience is the quality of speaker we can reach relatively easily. Trying to get Clem over to the UK on the right day, available in a venue, is complex, costly, difficult. So Clem, thank you for being in your office. We really appreciate you joining us from there today. But you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to Clem. So let me tell you a little bit about our scenario planner, futurologist, and keynote speaker. Today we have the latter, talking about the former two activities. Known for the high road, low road scenario planning back in the 90s, which was when I first met Clem. Clem, you were doing a presentation at one of the prestigious hotels in Cape Town, and I had the honor of listening to what I thought was, my goodness, if you can get that to work, it will be absolutely incredible. And here we are today, being very grateful to the likes of Clem for the efforts he put in back in the 90s. He actually isn't a South African, he's a Brit who went to Oxford University and worked for Anglo in the UK. That took him to South Africa, probably 3+ decades ago, when he, I assume, had to fall in love with the country, because you're still there, Clem. But interestingly, he has a number of other claims to fame. His family, who started LSE, there's a family member, I don't know if there's more than one, buried at Westminster Abbey. He played on the same ticket as the Rolling Stones in Oxford once upon a time. And he played bridge with Agatha Christie. So these are the little insights that your family have been sharing with me. So I hope I have not embarrassed you, Clem. The part that I find absolutely amazing is when you listen to Clem and he has given his view, and you look at it and think, but it's so logical, it's so simple. It must be incredible to have your mind where you see the logic opportunity in the maze of noise, risk, personal agendas, human beings, countries, time. And his deep understanding of the UK and South Africa and the global interconnectedness of the two countries is something we are so grateful that you are who you are, and that we can all learn, and as a country have benefited so hugely from your insights. So one of the comments that you make is how important it is for us to be able to learn to think, which sounds so simple. It's what we try and teach children. Now think about what the answer is. Think through your scenarios. How to look into the future, not say where you are today. I asked somebody to do this, was a financial director, and I said, what about this one in the future? He says, I'll deal with it when I can see it and I can put the numbers in the spreadsheet. Well, that is not going to solve world problems. And thank goodness we've got people like Clem. So we've got these different kinds of thinking, cognitive diversity that we need in the world. Isaac Newton said, if I have seen further than others, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And that is an experience we are going to have for the next rest of the hour, is we are going to stand on the shoulder of this amazing giant of knowledge. The high road that I talked about a moment ago was negotiated to end the apartheid regime. That was the high road. Clem worked with the government and Klerk specifically to foster negotiations which steered the country and South Africa away from disaster, civil war, to instead bring us to that miraculous transition of power and to what became, as Mandela described it in the 90s, the Rainbow Nation. Clem and his colleagues run a company called Mind of a Fox. I'm never quite sure why, so I did some research, and I also opened his book that has just recently been published, which gave me some insights into the fox and the hedgehog. The fox is always looking for the broader opportunities and looking at the world in a bigger picture. Hedgehog has got one absolute purpose. And we need this different cognitive thinking in boardrooms, in businesses, in government, in families. Otherwise, we're all going to be doing one thing, and we're going to end up in blind spots developing, groupthink evolving, and as a result, in boards, we know neither of things that we want to happen. So today we are going to hear about South Africa and the world beyond in 2022, and what flags are there that are raising themselves in the future. What are the possible scenarios? What could play out over the next months and short-term years? And from whence are these circumstances going to come from? And what are the probabilities of each? And that is what Clem is going to spend his time as a giant sharing with us, that we can stand on his shoulders and be better at preparing for the future than we are sitting here right at this moment. Please use the Q&A function, everybody. I will pick that up and ask Clem some questions towards the end. But now Clem is going to be the one to take the stage, and he's going to share his deep, wonderful insights with us. Clem, I hand over to you.
Sharon, and hello, everybody. Sharon showed you the book, which I wrote with Mitch Ilbery last year, Thinking the Future. It's done very well. It's now in its fourth impression, and it's done pretty well on Amazon because I think we're in a very uncertain moment, and therefore the skill of thinking the future is very much required. I'd like to only refer to two giants in the book, which are in the opening chapter, Plato and Aristotle, two famous ancient Greek philosophers, because they illustrate the difference between foxes and hedgehogs. Plato very much said that you've got to think about the ideal blueprint for the world, and that is what creates a true philosopher. So you're stroking your chin, you're thinking of that ideal blueprint. And of course, there are a lot of people today who feel this way and want to search for that ideal vision for their company or ideal policy for their country. And they don't want to move away from it. And some of them are sensationally successful. And of course, they're very much the hedgehogs who have one idea. Foxes are like Aristotle. Aristotle said it's not about just the one idea. It's about looking around you, seeking evidence with your senses and changing your opinion. And it's basically Aristotle who created the whole following of science, where you don't have fixed opinions. You constantly come up with evidence that suggests you should modify scientific laws. And the same is true about the future, that you should be looking around you with the bright eyes of a fox to see how the world is changing, and then adapt your behavior accordingly in a very agile manner so that you can be ahead of your competitors. So that's why I have, for most of my life, said that one should think like foxes. Indeed, with Mitch's mother, Chantal Ilbery, we wrote The Mind of a Fox back in 2001, where we put this approach forward. And it's been proved very popular because the world is a very uncertain place at the moment. And essentially, the methodology that we've adopted is that you should look for the flags that are changing the present into the future, the forces that are creating a new game around you. And then out of those flags, you look at different scenarios for the future. I'd like to give you one example. In the book that Chantal and I wrote in 2001, we published it in June, and we had a letter to George Bush inside the book in which we said that one of his principal threats was a massive terrorist strike on a Western city. And the reason we said that to him was that there were three flags that went up during the latter half of the last century. The first one in the late 70s was really the growing competition between the major religions of the world, particularly Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The second flag was that terrorist movements were getting far more sophisticated in their strategy and tactics. But the flag that said to us something could happen in America or Europe was the two attacks by Al-Qaeda on American embassies in Africa in 1998, one in Tanzania and the other in Kenya, which we felt could be a dress rehearsal for the real thing in America. And that is the whole point of a flag. It's not that you can tell the exact date that something's going to happen and how it's going to happen, but it can increase your awareness that you've got to look for those pieces of evidence that would suggest that the flag is going up the pole. I remember 6 months after 9/11 being run by somebody in the US State Department who said, it's really interesting, we've done a literature search and yours is the only book that in a formal sense said to our president that this scenario could happen of 9/11. How come that two South Africans could be ahead of US intelligence agencies? And I said, it's because of our approach. We look for the flags, and we had those flags that I mentioned. We didn't know when an event was going to happen, but of course we wanted to warn the president of the increasing threat posed by the religious flag. And indeed, it came out in the congressional inquiry after 9/11 that there was a young woman in the FBI who went to her boss on 6 occasions and said, "Boss, there's a flying school down the road where Arabs are learning to take off but not land." And that should have really meant that all the school where they were being taught should have been investigated, that they should have been investigated because they turned out to be 2 of the 19 pilots who took part in 9/11. So that's the whole point of our approach, is to try and really examine the present for all those flags that are changing the game into the future, and then exploring different scenarios rather than being a hedgehog and sticking with a single forecast. And I'd like to go through some of the flags that I've been examining over the last 10 to 15 years with companies, which are still changing the world around us today. The first one is the red flag. And it really consists of 3 countries: Russia, China, and North Korea. In the case of Russia, the flag started going up in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. And I actually devoted 10 pages of a book I wrote at the time called Flag Watching to looking at scenarios of what would happen after that annexation of Crimea. And I also said in the book that Putin was very much interested in the eastern part of Ukraine as well, because that's where predominantly the Russian-speaking Ukrainians live. And of course, the flag really has gone up this year with the invasion of the Ukraine in February. So one of the things which I've been asked to do now is what are the possible scenarios that can flow out of the war that is currently taking place in the Ukraine. And essentially I say, look, there's quite a few. The first one is stalemate, where the Ukrainians and the Russians just go on having a war for many years because the Russians completely underestimated the Ukrainian resolve to fight. And equally, of course, the Ukrainians are being given very sophisticated weapons by the West. So it could turn into a kind of long stalemate with no side really winning. But of course, the country suffering, lots of people dying, property being destroyed. It's not a great scenario, a stalemate scenario. The second one is that one or other side actually wins the war. Russia wins it because of sheer logistics that they have available inside Russia and numbers of soldiers that they can conscript. But on the other side, there are plenty of generals in the US and the UK who say that Ukraine could actually win this war because Russia will eventually lack the resolve to continue it. So there is a victory on either side scenario. Personally, I feel that is less probable than the stalemate. But if I was asking which side at the moment would possibly gain the victory, it would be the Russians through just sheer numbers and logistics. But not over the whole of Ukraine, over the eastern area of the Donbass and obviously Crimea. The third scenario is a diplomatic solution, which is very hard to see at this point because President Zelensky has said that there is no way that he wants to give up an inch of Ukraine. And certainly, I think that the Russians will expect to keep the Crimea and possibly the eastern region where they're dominating as well. So if that isn't part of the negotiation, I don't see how it really can start. But, you know, maybe people will change their minds because they'll get tired of the war and fatigue will set in. The last scenario I actually put in the 2014 book, which is that, you know, if a war develops in the Ukraine, it could end up in a war between NATO and Russia. And that's the one that I really fear at the moment because, you know, if you go back in the history of wars, there's always surprise incidents that lead to escalation between the major players. I mean, we had one yesterday with Lithuania banning any goods from Russia, particularly the ones that have been sanctioned, getting through to Kaliningrad, which is a small Russian enclave on the western side of Lithuania. And the Russians have said that is, you know, as you declaring war on us. Now, the point is, Lithuania is a NATO member, and if the Russians attack Lithuania, then, you know, does that NATO clause click in, all for one and one for all? So this scenario right now has to be borne in mind because that changes everything. And, you know, Europe will become a very dangerous place. The UK, which is very strongly sided with the Ukraine and America, will definitely be brought into the war. So as a scenario planner, I think that people should tease out what the narrative could be for whatever business or industry they're in, should this last scenario actually happen. The second part of the flag is China. And I did a session in China in 2006 with the Central Party School, which is the leadership academy of the Chinese Communist Party. And they made it very plain in this session that Deng was the real inspirational leader. Mao was history, but it was Deng who had said two things. Firstly, we as the Communist Party are going to build a completely new infrastructure for China. And then secondly, we're going to allow ordinary Chinese people to create wealth for themselves and become entrepreneurs. And if we adopt those two principles, we can become one of the world's most successful economies. And just think about it, in 1978, when Deng got the job as president, they were the 100th ranked economy in the world. And when I did my session with the Central Party School, they were number 5. And of course, now they're number 2. And they could overtake America to become the largest economy in the world by the mid-2030s, in which case the rest of the century will belong to China and the East, as opposed to America and the West, which is huge. That is an incredible game changer. In many ways, I guess it would be similar to America taking over from Britain at the beginning of the last century as the kind of lead player in the world. And it's probably one of the reasons why America's influence has been declining over the last 10 years, because China is catching up so quickly on America. But relationships between the two are not that good. They're very edgy. It would appear that the current president of China, President Xi, is adopting some of the old principles of Mao, which go against the kind of free market principles of Deng. And so one is a little bit worried about that. But of course, what really is the principal flag to watch is Taiwan, to see whether China could invade Taiwan in the same way that Russia has invaded Ukraine, and what kind of war might be precipitated in the region as a result of that. I mean, the Chinese are increasing their military influence in the Pacific Islands, and of course Australia is very worried about this at this point. But it's in a sense a very divided world that we're living in, when the two leading countries in the world basically are certainly not on friendly terms at the moment. In fact, Biden talks about, autocracy versus democracy, and he puts Russia and China into that category of being an autocracy. The third element of the flag is North Korea. Despite all the photographs taken of Trump with Kim Jong-un and the kind of friendliness on both sides at that point, nothing happened. There was no denuclearization of North Korea. They've still got about 50 nuclear weapons. And of course, they've started their ballistic missile tests again. And there's plenty of tensions between North and South Korea. And also, in a way, between North Korea and Japan. And so, yeah, it's got to be watched as a flag, because, again, another war could flow out of that particular one. I mean, the last one, in a nuclear sense, you've got to watch Iran, because it would appear that they now are much more set on obtaining a nuclear weapon. They've closed down some of the cameras that were operated by the International Atomic Energy Agency in their uranium facilities. And of course, Israel has actually said there is no way that they will allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. So, yeah, the red flag at the moment is full of potential drama, and you've got to watch the news on that flag every day. The second flag for me is actually more important, which is the green flag of climate change, which really, unfortunately, has been completely overshadowed by the red flag. But it is actually a question of survival of the planet. Indeed, there are many climate scientists now saying that the extreme weather that the world is experiencing today was something that they only thought would happen by 2050, 2070. And you can see that we've had our attention diverted, because Germany has just announced that it's going to go back to reopening some of its old coal-burning power plants. So, yeah, we're not certainly reducing fossil fuels or doing anything like that when we are really beginning to feel that extreme weather, extreme drought, which has been in central Spain and Portugal, extreme rainfall that Bangladesh has just had, Queensland in Australia. They now have places in Queensland they call climate ghettos, because you cannot get insurance for your belongings or house in those areas, because there's a too high a frequency of flooding. So it really is beginning to change life. And then, of course, the slower impact of the green flag is that sea levels are rising, which will ultimately threaten coastal cities. Even London could be threatened. And I know that there are flood defenses for London. But yeah, it could completely change our game. And unfortunately, the red flag has diverted our attention because human conflict completely trumps climate change. And so you've got to continue watching that flag and see whether we are in some way going to reduce our carbon footprint. However, there is one very positive flag that I always like to bring up to show that it's not just all about misery, which is the technological flag. The world does go through technological waves. And of course, the recent one was microelectronics and devices like the iPhone and computers and all that kind of stuff. Before that, of course, there was the television set. Before that, there were cars. So we do have these sort of major new technologies. And it would be just so wonderful if over the next 10 to 20 years, we see real advances in technology in terms of producing green energy, whether it's the use of hydrogen, electric vehicles. There is a problem with electric vehicles, which is lithium is a rare earth, and it could well run into very short supply and be difficult to get hold of if everybody starts driving electric cars. We could have nuclear fusion as opposed to nuclear fission, which would certainly overcome any problems of energy shortages. And of course, there is straightforward nuclear power plants, but people understand the risks as you have in the Ukraine at the moment if the whole world moves into nuclear fission power plants. So, you know, it's an interesting time because there is a need, which is clean energy, and maybe human innovation will create the necessary new energy systems that we can lower our carbon footprint with. The third flag is the pandemic itself. We've always had it as a flag ever since 2001, that there could be another pandemic this century, and here we are. We've had the pandemic. The coronavirus is now in a much milder variant with Omicron, and we had that incredible vaccination program. I mean, most people thought vaccines would take 2 to 5 years. In fact, they were available by the end of the first year of the pandemic. That wonderful German couple of Turkish origin who produced the Pfizer vaccine, and then everybody else, and it changed the game. And we still, of course, have people catching the disease, but the death rate has gone down hugely. In fact, I saw yesterday a comment in America that even though the number of cases is increasing, the death rate has stayed down. So it looks like the beginning of the end of this pandemic. But of course, there are certain threads to the pandemic flag which will continue, like working from home. And there are plenty of other things that people have discovered about their own lifestyles during the pandemic that you've got to tease out and say, am I actually taking enough knowledge of the consequences of the pandemic and adjusting my own business, lifestyle, whatever it is, in order to cope with those changes in ordinary life created by the pandemic. And of course, the flag isn't down because we could always have another virus coming along, creating a further pandemic. But hopefully, we're now better prepared and we don't have to shut down the whole global economy because of this particular flag. The fourth flag flows completely out of the pandemic, which is the inequality flag. Is, you know, we started becoming a very unequal world with the financial crash of 2008 because by 2012, the super rich were back to being super rich because the stock markets had all recovered. But for ordinary people who rely on their salaries and wages and don't have much savings, and I would say 2/3 of British people are in that category, and probably 2/3 of Americans, you know, they don't have money in the stock market or anywhere. They live off what they earn. And, you know, to be honest, real wages and salaries in many cases are below what they were in 2007. And so there's a real feeling of anger about it. And everybody, of course, now is talking about the cost of living and inflation. And it's created huge anger. And governments really don't know how to handle it. I mean, we've lived in this period of very, very easy money. And so interest rates have been unbelievably low, close to zero, some cases even negative. And yes, if you put up interest rates to block off inflation, you could create lots of problems. I mean, national debt is so much more in most countries, more than 100% of GDP. You know, are we going to see another kind of default like you had the mortgage default, which triggered the 2008 crash? Are we going to see that kind of default with national debt in countries which have become hugely more indebted? But obviously for ordinary people, if you suddenly start putting up interest rates to 5%, when they've been virtually zero for the last 10 years, that's going to have an incredible impact on people's life, just when prices have gone up, meaning that they can't actually afford to buy all the things that they have in the past. I mean, I had a lady on TV saying, I've now got to prioritize petrol versus food and come out with some kind of equation that works because I can't afford both. So, you know, the inequality flag right now is way up the mast, and it's causing all kinds of political mayhem and economic mayhem as well. And then the last flag I want to talk about is one which is very different. It's called crowded space. And the fact is that we have around the earth never had any laws about how many satellites or things floating in space there should be. There was one law in 1967 by the UN. But since then, you've got all these countries and companies like SpaceX with things floating around the world. And of course, we're hugely dependent on a viable system, because if a satellite crashes into another one and all the debris then starts a chain effect in that sort of level of orbit in space, it could bring down our banking system as well as our communication system. So we feel very strongly that one must watch that crowded space flag at the moment. And certainly China has taken it to the UN because one of their satellites very nearly crashed with a SpaceX satellite recently. So what are the two scenarios that flow out of these flags for the world? Well, we have the ones that we gave to George Bush in the letter, Friendly Planet, where you see much greater cooperation to overcome the problems of climate change, of international drug syndicates. You do everything to create a more cooperative world. That was the one scenario we put to Bush. The second one we call Gilded Cage. It's where the West retires into a cage. It puts up the barriers against illegal immigrants. It basically fights wars as a team called the West. And it's the exact opposite of what we had in the last century, which was globalization and free movement of people and goods. Now you have the West in its gilded cage, the rich old millions in their gilded cage, and you have the rest of the world outside. And yeah, when people now ask me, given your flags, what kind of, which scenario is in play, I have to unfortunately say it's very much the gilded cage at the moment, caused by the war in Ukraine and, of course, by the kind of polemic that Biden is coming out with, its democracy versus autocracy. And we're not going to give in any way. And sure, nobody should have given in to Adolf Hitler when we fought the Second World War. But as we say, Mitch and I, in the book, we quote a British historian called Veronica Wedgwood, who said conflict is absolutely at the center of the DNA of human beings, conflict. And yeah, we're in a conflict zone at the moment. So it's a tough world. It's a tough world. And these flags have to be watched. For South Africa, we basically had two scenarios that we put in the book. We called them People's Economy and Cautionary Tale. And I'd like to just read what we said about the People's Economy and Cautionary Tale in the book. The People's Economy, we call it People's Economy to convey the message that the work achieved by Nelson Mandela before and after the dawn of South Africa's democracy constitutes unfinished business. In this sequel, the country now achieves economic freedom for all as a necessary complement to political freedom. The government creates an inclusive economy with a new generation of young entrepreneurs at the helm. And this is very, very important because, you know, South Africa has been very much a big business economy with the mining industry and the banks and other big businesses. It's actually got world-class businesses here. Retail chains like Pick n Pay and Woolworths are as good as any retail chains anywhere else in the world. But what we have never done is actually said, you want to create jobs, you want to get our appalling unemployment rate down from 35 to 40% to 10%, you've got to put most of the economic priority on small business and creating new entrepreneurs. And we've got to somehow get rid of the barriers that still exist between the township economies in South Africa and the mainstream economy. I mean, we still have economic apartheid. We've got rid of political apartheid, but we still have economic apartheid here. And we're going to have to now really, really go for it in terms of opening up our economy and creating economic freedom. And if we don't do that, we call the second scenario cautionary tale. Here, South Africa experiences rising popular anger caused by an economy that is stagnant, exclusive, and cursed by a dismally high unemployment rate. This leads to further disunity and widespread violence with a possible endpoint of total anarchy in the chain of causation. And we saw a bit of that last year during the pandemic in KwaZulu-Natal with all the looting, that terrible looting that took place in the shopping malls. But then you saw the good side, which is people came together to actually clean up the mess and to protect further property being damaged. And it was Team South Africa at the bottom that really came together to do that. There wasn't white, black, Indian, colored, anything like that. It was South Africans who came together as a team to get out of that terrible two-day incident of looting. And we've seen it more recently with the flooding in KwaZulu-Natal. Car companies like Toyota were completely flooded, and the workers have come together and cleaned the whole place up, and production has started again. So it wasn't the government, it was just ordinary people on the ground in South Africa. And that's why I'm actually more hopeful about the people's economy in South Africa, because it's a ground-up revolution. We've got to have sensible government and law and order and all those other flags going up the pole. But what we really need is a ground-up revolution where entrepreneurs kind of lead the way in South Africa. And lastly, I'd like to just show you something. It's a kind of matrix of the two. I'll put it back. if you can just see, I've got the Global Friendly Planet and Gilded Cage there. I've got People's Economy and Cautionary Tale. And I say to people, just, see which you feel is in play, because if we are in both the Friendly Planet and People's Economy, it's the best of both worlds. If we are in a case of a cautionary tale in South Africa, but the world economy is moving towards Friendly Planet, then spread your wings in terms of investment, possibly emigrate, do what you feel is best. If, on the other hand, South Africa is doing better than the global economy, we can call ourselves a safe haven. People will be very pleased that they stayed here. And of course, if both the world and South Africa are in the nasty scenarios, it's just hard times. But it's really worth just kind of every day looking at these scenarios and kind of saying, which do I feel is in play? Because that's what the whole point of the technique is the world changes, the flags go up, the flags go down, the probability of those scenarios changes. Let me just give you one example. In December 1999, the FTSE 100 was 6,950. You know what it is today? 7,150. So in 22 years, it's gone up 200 points. That's what the FTSE's done in London. In South Africa, the ALSI, All Share Index, round about the turn of the century was around about 8,000. It's now 64,000. So it's gone up 8 times. And guess what? The Rand in the turn of the century was 10 to the pound. It's now 20. So yes, the Rand has halved. But the All Share Index has gone from around about 8,000 to 64,000, 8 times. So you would have made 4 times as much money in the last 22 years if you had invested in South Africa than if you had actually invested in London. So I just want to leave you with that thought, because there are so many people who just think that it's dumb investing in South Africa or living in South Africa. Actually, in the last 22 years, it's been the exact opposite in terms of the markets. And that's why you have to do scenario planning. So I hope I've entertained you. I hope that I've persuaded you to be foxes. You can buy the book on Amazon, or you can order the physical book. You can buy it as a Kindle version if you want. And it really is the methodology to use in these uncertain times. I've given you the flags for the world and the 2 scenarios. I've given you the South African scenarios, and I'd like to end with a benediction for all of you who've listened to me. May the fox be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Clem. I don't think there are many people who can hold our attention for literally going on 40, 45 minutes. It's amazing. I could listen to you forever. It really is interesting. The one thing that you made reference to was the growth of the entrepreneurial energy and growth of desire for change within the world, and particularly in South Africa, and the desire to look after, to get employed, to change their lives, things like that. And you said it's not something that's going to be government-led. But surely the government must let go some of the tight strings it has, the degree of regulation or ownership, manipulation, whatever we want to call it, to allow this entrepreneurial spirit to be more productive more easily? Make it an easier place to do business?
Absolutely. It came across in China. That's why I wanted to mention that visit to the Central Party School. That the huge thing that Deng did, and I'm afraid to say, as I said, the current leader is not so much oriented towards the Deng type of thinking, but Deng actually said, we've got to let go of a lot of things in China and allow ordinary people to create wealth. And that one thing has made China the economic miracle of the last 45 years. So, you know, I'm thinking of many state-owned enterprises in South Africa that one could put possibly into private hands. There should be a public-private partnership on electricity production, because Eskom at the moment is not fulfilling its mandate. We've got load shedding. But there are plenty of mining companies and other companies here that can actually build perfectly successful power plants. So we need that kind of public-private partnership. But most of all, you know, the days are gone when big business created the majority of jobs in any country in the world. In America right now, they reckon in the recovery of the pandemic, 2/3 of the jobs being created are in small and micro enterprise. So, you know, it's a flag on changing practice of work. And it's those countries that embrace entrepreneurship that actually allow people to create jobs for themselves. And it is a totally different game. And you're quite right. In South Africa, the government here has to acknowledge that message and then do everything it can to support all the small businesses in rural and urban areas and township economies, and of course in our main cities.
And being a futurologist, being a scenario planner, given the political change that we will encounter of some degree over the next year and 2 years, being both the national election of the leader of the party and equally the election in the country the following year, where would you put your prediction on South Africa taking the old style high road? In other words, what we're talking about now being the better of the two options you talked about, and I'm going to lose the words, I'll find it in a second. You were talking about two scenarios: people's economy or the cautionary tale.
People's economy or cautionary tale.
What do you think what are the probabilities of the people's economy?
Yeah, at the moment, I feel that, you know, the government is allowing much greater activity in the private sector. It hasn't positively embraced the message of entrepreneurs. I don't see Cyril, our president, or other government ministers going on TV saying, what are the 5 things that we must do to create an entrepreneurial economy in South Africa? We haven't got that. But because the government itself has basically run out of money, because most governments in the world have run out of money because of the pandemic and because of the hard times we're in, they are allowing the private sector more freedom. And it is amazing how, you know, we have actually conducted ourselves pretty well during this pandemic because of the sort of more laissez-faire attitude of the government. I mean, I did a debate with Julius Malema in early 2016. You can watch it actually on YouTube. It's Malema versus Sunter. And we had a friendly debate after dinner for the Cape Chamber of Commerce. And yeah, it went on for about 3 or 4 hours with people asking questions. But the one point I made to Julius was, I'm as much of an economic freedom fighter as you are, Julius. It's just that my definition of economic freedom is different to yours. You want to nationalize the land and the government and the banks and the mines and things like that. I want to really create a much more open system for our economy, where, you know, small businesses can do huge things. They can become national champions, and they can become international champions. I mean, think of it. The richest guy in the world went to Pretoria Boys High, Elon Musk. You know, we have people like that in South Africa who are unbelievably brilliant. And so, you know, why is America the #1 economy in the world? Because it produces the entrepreneurs who make things. Steve Jobs, very good example, a Syrian descent. He went to America he created the iPhone. That's what makes a country great. Yes, the politicians are useful because they create the kind of platform in which the entrepreneurs can operate, but it's the entrepreneurs that actually decide the fate of a country. And that's why we call the scenario people's economy.
I like the idea of the people's economy, and let's hope that we are going to go in that direction in every respect. One of the questions that's come up, and also one of my consideration to this as well, is BEE has come in to correct certain things. It has had its term, it's been around 30 years. Is there time for that to change? Is that one of the impediments to the people's economy? Is there a risk in that space that stops your son, for example, being able to be an entrepreneur? Because he's a white male, I'm making that assumption. So big assumption I'm making there.
Yeah, no, but look, your point is valid in that, you know, the original form of BEE, Black Economic Empowerment, was very much about big companies putting influential people on their boards and so forth and so on. And, you know, that's absolutely not what proper empowerment is about, because that's and that's why I've chosen the word people's economy, because it's not about, you know, doing things for a chosen bunch of people and making sure that they end up in management or shareholders or on the board of directors. You know, it's more about what kind of economic model can benefit the ordinary people in the street, and you know, it's a different form of Black economic empowerment to the one that we originally had in South Africa. And you know, I think that as I said, the looting last year and then the pushback afterwards showed that even though you know, lots of politicians talk about black and white at the top, once you get down to ordinary people on the ground, who are working for companies or working for universities or wherever they're working, they work as a team. And it's one of the really enchanting things about being in South Africa, is that at that lower level, you really don't have sort of any form of hatred at all. And so, yeah, we can do it, but we've got to put that emphasis on entrepreneurship and opening up our economy.
And I think it's going to take all of us within our working environment to address BEE in an effective manner, so we do empower and remove the gaps and enhance our people. A question I'd like to ask is around South Africa's attitude, approach, stance, concerns to Russia, and therefore the reputational risk on South Africa as a greater economy, and therefore how could that impact companies in South Africa in the way they might be damaged in the reputational fallout of a Russian approach that South Africa's taken?
Look, the point is this, is that, and that's why I talked about the gilded cage, is it's obviously much more difficult to put anything on Russia's side. Like, for example, the fact that NATO moved east very quickly after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, much more quickly than many Russians believed. And in fact, that was one of the motivations for Putin drawing the line in the sand. And in fact, I mentioned it in the 2015 book Flag Watching, that it was a sore point in Russia. So, you know, actually it's the whole of Africa and the whole of South America, and there are plenty of other countries who are actually not favoring one side or the other. They just want the war to stop. So it's not that South Africa sort of suddenly stood out as the only nation that, you know, didn't, you know, take sides against the Russians. There's plenty of countries in the world that actually just want the war to end because you can see the dreadful human toll. And I know that the argument, the counter argument is, oh gosh, well now you're going back to Neville Chamberlain and accommodating Hitler and all that kind of stuff. But actually, if you want to have a diplomatic settlement, you're going to have to have give and take on both sides. I mean, the one fantastic thing about the high road, low road scenarios we did in the 1980s was that we didn't have a conflict. We said, here's the high road where you negotiate. And at the time, I can promise you, people said, you're crazy, Clem. Nobody. The ANC will never negotiate with the National Party. But guess what? They did. And it was because of the people that were around at the time. Yes. You had Nelson Mandela, who I saw in jail. I saw him a month before he came out of jail. And I had 5 hours with the great man in his cottage in Victor Verster in Park. And we talked through the future of South Africa. And then when he came out, he made it happen with F.W. de Klerk, who was incredible because he accommodated it. And we didn't have a war like there's going on in the Ukraine. We actually came to a diplomatic settlement. And that's what you need for the Ukraine. There's going to have to be some form of diplomatic settlement to end all the, deaths and damage to property. And we're about as good an example because I can promise you, in the mid-80s, most people thought we were going to have a civil war, and we didn't.
And we didn't, absolutely. It's time, I think, Russia and Ukraine and a few others put their testosterone in their briefcase and put it to the side and started some of the discussions. Just a last question quickly. You made reference to Germany having to reopen some of its carbon unfriendly environments. South Africa is suffering stages and waves of load shedding. And now I see water shedding too, which is a new one on all of us and unfortunate, and quite a few cities are probably going to be suffering over time. But if you look at that carbon footprint situation of the green flag and where South Africa is practically, economically, business-wise, what is its best strategy overall? There's the carbon, there's letting people put stuff into the grid. How are we going to solve that carbon side, power side?
Yeah, it's difficult because, as you rightly say, most of the power stations in South Africa are coal-burning power stations. But we've got Koeberg. We can build, obviously, another nuclear power station in South Africa, but it's very expensive. I mean, we had one tender from the Russians, but it was, through the roof in terms of price. And so, unfortunately, at the moment, nuclear energy is terribly expensive. And of course, it has all the problems of where do you put the waste fuel and stuff like that. So, at the moment, I think that we've got to allow the private sector to come up with, more solar farms, because we've got plenty of sun in South Africa. We can certainly put more tidal energy complexes in around our coast, and maybe one or two more ones using our rivers. So, I do want us to try and produce new energy by cleaner means. But meanwhile, the most important thing is to throw it open so that you have the kind of Elon Musk type of person in South Africa has got the same kind of inventive mind, coming up with solutions in a way that the government cannot do that in terms of technologies.
Yeah, and the Elon Musks, the Bill Gates, the Bezos, the Zuckerbergs, those kind of people who have really changed our business world, changed some of our economic balances in the world, created a different way in which we communicate, we can do things, cost of many of these things. How risky are they as individual stroke companies to world balance?
Well, at the moment, I think that, the only person who's really come out as a real greenie is Bill Gates. The rest have sort of, I don't know where they stand. I guess what they would say is we're not as damaging as ordinary manufacturing because we're in high tech sort of thing, and any green solutions are going to need high tech. But I want to just make one point. It's in this second last chapter of this book, Thinking the Future. We mention Steve Jobs and Nelson Mandela, and we call the chapter Thinking and Doing, because it's not just about doing the scenarios and assessing the flags and then the probabilities of the scenarios. It's then about saying, what am I going to do? Because in the end, what makes you great is action.
Doing it.
Doing it, exactly. And so, I'd hate to just, have thrown out the way you think about the future without saying, this is all preparatory to actually doing it, because that's what foxes do.
Yeah, and it's up to all of us now to take your wise words and make a difference and to do something very, very specific about ensuring we take the correct roads into the future. Clem, we have run over time. I could happily chat to you for much, much longer. Thanks so much for your insights, your wisdom, the clarity, the options. And I look at that grid and I look at where some of those countries are on your quadrant grid and sincerely hope we all shift into a much safer place than we are today. Thank you so much, Clem. Really appreciate it. If you'd like to take a moment to look at the chat, you will see how appreciative this very large group of people has been. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And as I said, may the fox be with you.
I have got plenty on my property, and they're large and they're big and they're beautiful and they're fascinating to watch. And they've got their cubs at the moment and they really are quite cute. So no, thank you for that, Clem. Thoroughly enjoyable, and look forward to hopefully seeing you in person when I'm in South Africa shortly.
Cheers, Sharon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers, bye.